Hello, Culture Matters podcast. We're back with another Beyond Order Rule 5 today. Part 1, Rule 5 of Beyond Order, 12 more rules for life. Before I introduce the rule, here's a quote just for this podcast. Something we cannot see protects us from something we do not understand. The thing we cannot see is culture in its intrapsychic or internal manifestation. The thing we do not understand is the chaos that gave rise to culture. If the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return. Today, we're on Rule 5 of Beyond Order. We've gone through Rule 1, we've gone through Rule 2. Rule 1, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievements. Rule 2, imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. Rule 3, do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Rule 4, notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. And today, Rule 5, do not do what you hate. I have a quote because there's two conversations happening. This is one of my favorite rules for the Culture Matters podcast because the premise of do not, or the stage that's set with this rule, do not do what you hate, is a example of a client that Dr. Peterson has, had worked with in the past, whose organization, in their estimation, had become corrupted, distracted, and enmeshed, um, ensconced with ideology, with um, ideas, and in turn, conversations and circumstances that distracted from the organization's aim and goal and mission while simultaneously undermining the agency of the individuals that worked for and with that organization. In this example of organization, in this Rule 5, there's two conversations. There's the individual conversation or the employee conversation, regardless of the level of their employment, whether CEO or middle manager or just bottom of the rung intern. And then there's organization. I want to speak to both a bit here because the chapter or the rule focuses on the individual, but it's hard to it's an opportunity here on the Culture Matters podcast to talk about the organization, talk about culture and company culture and how that can influence and does influence people hating not only the organization they work for and with, but who they are or who they become enmeshed and interwoven in an organization as it goes through the ebbs and flows of the market, of society, of management, and so on. Here's a quote or a thought that I want to read to you actually when I was preparing my notes that came to me. Great companies become good companies that lose great people. Good companies tolerate mediocre managers that attract bad people. Bad people make good companies bad companies. But how do great companies become good companies? They lose their purpose. The story, the spirit, the values, the rituals, the love, the fun, the energy, the atmosphere. Great companies lose all of the above, and they slowly become, they metastasize and become hardened and slow and bureaucratic and political and selfish and self-oriented and become good companies. They lose the spark. A lot of our work or our work is in helping transform or um, renew, reinvigorate, innovate, inspire. First, understand, come into knowing, discovering, exploring, endeavoring, and then understanding, recognizing, understanding, apprehending, and taking hold and redirecting and re-aiming. But in this chapter, we'll come back to that, or in this rule, do not do what you hate. There, what's the journey? And then maybe if you're listening to this, you're in a position where you work for a company, where you have begun to hate the organization and in turn, potentially even not like who you've become. That's a focal point in this rule is the gravity of actually what happens to us when pathology or pathological behavior, pathological ideas that suck the light out of us, suck the life out of us, undermine the ability to think, undermine the ability to speak, undermine the ability to do, undermine like without permission from another, undermine the ability to uh, orient one's spirit at the highest with the organization. You know, um, I think Rule 5, if we're looking from an organization, it has to, well, I'm going to look it through it from an organizational standpoint first, right? Well, but in the, it's like which one was, it's the chicken or the egg. If you're in that position right now today, you have, ultimately the advice in Rule 5 is speak up. Don't let 40 years go by. Don't let the best of you be lost as a consequence of things out of your control that are happening in your organization's culture. If you follow Rule 4, because now Rule 5 comes after Rule 4, maybe you've noticed that leadership has responsibility has been abdicated. You've listened to the last uh, breakdown of that, and you're saying, I'm going to go all in on my work. I'm going to pay more attention. I'm going to solve problems. And now in that circumstance, you're going to grow personally from actually taking on more responsibility in the face of irresponsibility, in the face of problems, instead of disengaging with your work, mirroring leadership and their disengagement. Rule 4, right? Notice that the leaders abdicated responsibility. So now I'm going to abdicate responsibility. It's tit for tat. Now we're all unhappy in this marriage of work together. Instead of doing that, go all in. Now, what can happen is you grow as a person from that. That's the advice. You can also, in Rule 4, it talks about as an individual, you're going to gain market share in that organization. People will take notice. You're on the path to actually getting promoted and moving up professionally. So when an organization becomes corrupt, you can speak up. Now, speaking up means within the organization, don't just succumb to rule number 3 or the opposite of rule number 3 and hide things in the fog, right? It says, do not hide unwanted things in the fog, because the more that you repress, this affects rule 2. Imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. The more that you repress, the less you can see of yourself and see where you're going and see who you could be. And actually, you start to lose a big part of who you are as an individual and your actual identity and your actual self by repressing, by not saying. So speaking, now this is the thing, the majority and the likelihood is that between corruption and speaking up, We're not like the Gulf, the most of us are going to be stuck in that purgatory. Corruption happens, speaking up doesn't happen. So just it's repression. But a percentage, I would say, there's going to be a percentage of that percentage that don't speak up, right? The percentage that speak up, they're likely to be the pariahs or the promoted. I'll get to that. Percentage that don't speak or speak up and stop and give up or don't speak up, they may end up being ones that speak out. Now you see people, you see this in business, they've gone and started a side hustle or they're doing something on the side where they have a voice. They have they're vocal on the social media platform, not vocal in the company. That's become the outlet for the person's identity to flourish because the organization is not um, honest enough, integrated enough, of integrity enough to gather their energy and filter it up the chain of hierarchy of competence because it's an incompetent organization. An organization loses its competence. This is part of the chapter here when it adopts when it forgets the past, when it and ultimately the management is not acting responsibly of agency, protecting the institution, protecting what it stands for. And this is where when organizations lose sight of their purpose, of why they exist for customers, of what they actually do, of how they've actually done it, and how and are unable to work together to figure out how they can do it better in the future for the customers. That of itself, the lack of that happening increases the likelihood of an organization. So in this Rule 5's example, a big organization adopted many policies and procedures that didn't have um, anything to do with the product or service, but were uh, in the know or in the now or in the know or of the pop culture um, ideologies, ideas, philosophies of the day, the zeitgeist of the times. Like, oh, we need to have a training on this. Oh, we need to get people knowing about this. Oh, we need to be focused on this. And in the example of this, in this rule, they're talking about how much time was spent analyzing whether a flip chart should be called an easel pad or a flip chart because of potentially someone at one point getting offended based on a word that wasn't even used anymore in the culture from a past um, hateful meme around a certain culture with the word flip. Who has time? This is the interesting piece. Who has time who has time to spend meetings talking about those things that are not the purpose of a business the purpose of a business is to uh, solve a customer's problem, right? Or the purpose of a business is to create a customer, Peter Drucker. That's not changed. Like it's to serve, it's to solve to, it's an economic engine to make the the consumers' lives better within the context that they choose to invest their capital. If we have time, we're making time. This is my argument organizationally. We're making time to sit around where it's a liability, spend money, lose money, invest quote unquote money, talking about pop culture or macro culture conflicts of the day, things that need to be handled politically, things that need to be handled at the lectern with the academics, things that need to be handled in different mediums through different institutions. If we're spending time on the wrong things out of context of the purpose of our company, which is to serve the customer, it demonstrates that we've lost sight. We're contradicting Rule 4. Or yeah, we're abdicating responsibility. It's like Osiris stopped paying attention, has a lot of extra time, leisure time to philosophize and pontificate on utopianism while the orphans are not being fed and the churches are burning down and the the generals or the treasurer, yeah, the treasurer is saying, "Hey, we're running out of coin for bread for the populace. We're going to have a famine soon." And the generals are saying there's a uprising of some unknown clan from the north that might be at our gates in the next 3 years, and Osiris, who stopped paying attention. If you're not familiar with the story, go listen to Rule 4. Um, who stopped paying attention is not doesn't want to hear any of that. Osiris wants to talk about the flip chart. And if anyone in the court may be offended personally by that, the opportunity for offense is a luxury in times of peace, which will only last as long as we protect ourselves from war. And so, do not do what you hate is a call to arms for each individual listening to this to speak up when your conscience calls you at work, period. Because what will happen for you is you'll either get promoted or you'll get rejected. And if you get rejected, you'll grow personally from being the best version of you as you saw it from your own conscience. Also, if you're wrong and you don't know what you don't know, you'll also grow from failure. Just add that as a side. It doesn't talk about that in the rule, but you could be wrong. You could not know as much as you think you do. You could need more training. You could need more development, and you're going to learn that from speaking up and speaking out. But you'll grow professionally. Not so if let's say you get ousted from the organization, you're not gonna grow professionally in the moment. You'll grow personally in the moment. Now, short-term you will be down. The argument is long-term you will be up professionally, but short-term you growth professionally, long-term you up growth professionally. So short-term personal, long-term professional. If you speak up and the organization spits you out, right? You're the pariah. If you're promoted, short-term you grew personally and short-term you grew professionally. And okay, great. That's also good. What likelihood is that? Well, you could also influence that by being, and this is one of the rules, I believe it's rule 10 in book 2, the 12 rules for life, an antidote to chaos. Or is it an antidote to suffering? Which is be precise in your speech. If you're precise in your speech, you may end up influencing people to your viewpoint but while diminishing all of the emotions and diminishing how, because things when things are very personal, when conversation is very personal, they're on ideas that people take personally. Those conversations can digress very easily into arguments, into ad hominem, into name calling, into saying things that one doesn't mean and one cannot take back, and losing one's professional demeanor and representing oneself in the worst way possible. So it's how also you speak up and is going to have an influence over how people take what you say seriously in times of stress and stress. One of the sentiments in Rule 5, do not do what you hate, is you'd be surprised. Your perceived enemy or your perceived opponent may actually agree with you immediately. They may be your hidden ally. They were thinking the exact same thing, and you said nothing, and they said nothing, and you both thought that you were at odds with one another, when that actually you felt the exact same way. And I know Peterson talks about the Soviet Union and I studied that for so many decades. In those types of cultures where everyone is thinking the same thing, but everyone is lying by commission and omission at all times, it's the fear of retribution that keeps friends enemies. And the longer that friends perceive one another as enemies and stay enemies in their indecision, the more power is given to the to the tyrant, to the evil leader up top, because people are fighting with one another as opposed to communicating with one another about what's really going on and getting to the source, which is, oh my gosh, the organization is sick. The organization does not have a clear vision. The organization does not have a clear mission. The organization is not living up to its own values. The organization is not functioning in a healthy manner. The organization is not focused on the customer. The organization is focused on the people at the top. It's focused on the shareholders. It's focused on itself. It's reactive, and it's sucking the life out of the people that are holding the organization up. It's sucking the life force out of them slowly, right? Or on the other extreme on that, everyone inside is absolutely on a high and totally, this is the other extreme. Everyone in the organization is high and it's completely on go, 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 go. But the life force of the customer is being sucked completely out. That's where the other side of the equation, where it's too much life force inside the organization, everyone inside employed in the organization, and at the cost of the customer. And that's where organizations they end up doing things that either were not illegal, that become illegal, or the things that are illegal, and then they get in trouble because they're cheating the system. They're cheating. They're at any given time, a game can be cheated. And that's why there are accountability mechanisms, not just the board, but there are regulators and there are third parties, because at any given time, one person's lie can lead to 1,000 people's omission. And those omissions then create more lies, which then create exponential curve of omission, which can create more lies. So, right, lies of commission versus lies of omission. We talk about that. That's brought up a handful of times in this Beyond Order book. And in the 12 rules for life, tell the truth or at least don't lie, which is, I think, rule 8 of 12 rules. Let me think about that for a second. So 6, 7 is pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Rule 8, tell the truth or at least don't lie. Rule 9, assume the person you are listening knows something you don't. Rule 10, be precise in your speech. Yeah, because in our next rule is abandon ideology, and then it's rule 7 and Beyond Order is work as hard as you possibly can on one thing and see what happens. Rule 8 is try and make one room in your home as beautiful as possible. 9, if old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely. 10, plan and work diligently. Yeah, that is correct. So what is this rule about? Okay, I brought it to another level or a different context by talking about the organization and how great companies become good companies that lose great people, right? Great companies become good companies because they lose sight of they basically don't follow the rules here, on a company level, right? So I wrote it down. Or this rule is about the individual mostly in Peterson's work, but we could do a whole nother book about the organization someday, maybe, which is when the organization doesn't follow rule 4, right? When leadership abdicates responsibility, it's more likely to adopt ideology. It's more likely to adopt something pathological. It's more likely to regress and become corrupt. When it becomes corrupted, that creates an overbearing pressure on the individuals that lose agency. They lose the ability to speak, think, and act in accordance with their conscience, in accordance with their competence, and then it's hard for them to see their future in the organization, which means it's hard for you, for me, for them, quote unquote, to see their future, which leads to purposelessness, which leads to a sense of meaninglessness, like nihilism can occurs, which makes people susceptible to ideology. Now that our employees are disengaged at work, and they're in the street waving a placard around about, something pop cultural instead of going home and reading a book and making their bed and working on their thesis and how they're going to fix the company they work for and try the best they can to make the company better. And that's kind of the advice here is I actually go all in, and then you'll just be better as a person and professional. um that can work for a certain group of people. Like, that's your answer. Now maybe a whole percentage of other humans that run the world, maybe your destiny is to just go and become in the street. That's a conversation for another day, I guess. But it's about the organization. Well, it's really about the individual, but what's implicit in this rule is the organization. That's what I've been elaborating on, is that when the organization isn't following Rule 4, it is attracted to the political, for example. I see this in founders all the time. The founder loses sight of their business and really their purpose and really where it's going, and really isn't as engaged as they once were. And now all of a sudden they want to run for president. They're distracted from actually working. They're doing their job, and they have enough resources and relationships to abdicate responsibility and make it look like they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. But especially those addicted to social media that run businesses, now all of a sudden they're absolutely just focused totally on the national politic, when really the responsibility to themselves, their communities, their families is to vote, is not to turn their business into a political machine. That now this is a whole blue ocean. This is happening. Another podcast, likely a consequence of social media integrating with our brains. Like, this is happening. We don't know what the consequence is going to be on this for small business in the future. We don't know. And many people have been incentivized to do this because they've gotten short-term bursts of business from having so many things in a vacuum, right? So all of a sudden you get all these new customers that want to work with your product because they believe what you believe, but that doesn't mean your product is actually valuable. That just means everybody is addicted to the neurotransmitters that are released when they feel like they're a part of something, which is this ideology that, like, they're right and everybody else is wrong and it's them versus the world. That is happening at such a level. It's why I try to have on the Culture Matters podcast differing people all the time, and I'm failing right now, failing deeply, because it seems like it's a lot of a one-sided conversation that I have to do a better job even. But the intention is to get people that have different thoughts, that are different types of people on the show, hopefully over time as I mature as an interviewer and a advisor and so on, and grow broader and broader networks of people. But so anyway, the organization, when it breaks Rule 4, it leaves Rule 3, which is it starts to hide unwanted things in the fog, which undermines Rule 2. Imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. When the organization stops imagining who it could be and aim single-mindedly at that, as a consequence of hiding things in the fog, as a consequence of abdicating leadership, the interesting thing is now it's people want to break Rule 1. They want to carelessly denigrate. They want to denigrate. It's interesting, carelessly. No, they're not carelessly denigrating social institutions or creative achievements. I guess it's interesting. They could be carefully denigrating the social institution. Not, well, I guess it could spark one, in the sense that what I mean by metaphorically is that now the people don't believe in the company anymore, and they want to change it. Or maybe they want to change eventually, let's change management. Let's change the whole thing. Now the people that work for the organization are not in positions of power to do so. That's where the board comes in. That's where private investors are just making tons of money in these days from buying businesses and changing the organizational structure. They're taking advantage of this global phenomenon that's taking place. So, in closing, on the individual side, when we work for an organization and we hide unwanted things in the fog, when we don't listen to our conscience, when we omit what we think, we stop thinking and we only feel. And when we only feel, it can start to make us crazy. It starts to impact our identity. Quote, if what you are doing is causing you to lash out at others impulsively, if what you are doing is destroying your motivation to move forward, if your actions and inactions are making you contemptuous of yourself and worse, of the world, if the manner in which you conduct your life is making it difficult for you to wake happily in the morning, if you are plagued by a deep sense of self-betrayal, perhaps you are choosing to ignore that still small voice, inclined as you may be to consider it something only attended to by the weak and naive. Our conscience will be stultified, and we're in that spirit, we're abdicating our responsibility to ourselves to show up and do the best job possible. That doesn't mean we can't look for other work. If there's no pathway forward that you can see and you've met with counsel and you've tried to get help, that's advice in this rule 5 in this chapter is, you put out your resume and you make sure you know what you're doing, and you add those extra skills that you may not have, and you go out there and you find yourself a new culture. I mean, hey, look how many immigrants leave their cultures and come to the United States of America, which is not perfect. There's many things that constantly are being worked on in the United States of America, but they're attracted to the system of governance and the concept of starting from anywhere and moving up as high as possible. And to them, those that come, if they're coming for something that they believe is worse, then they're going to inherently be more open-minded, grateful, in spirit, and despite wherever the institution is at, they're going to get the most out of it, I guess is the idea here. And so the same advice plays in this rule. Embrace all of your options. But if we don't speak up, if we don't tell the truth, if we don't even entertain that and listen to our conscience and follow that in the most respectful and dutiful way, ultimately, rule 5 is do not do what you hate. The longer you do what you hate, hate will embody you and take over you and cause you to lose who you are as an individual. It will cause you to lose who you are as an individual. Quote, that rejection, that betrayal of soul is truly the requirement to perform demonstrably counterproductive, absurd, or pointless work, to treat others unjustly and to lie about it, to engage in deceit, to betray your future self, to put up with unnecessary torture and abuse, and to silently watch others suffer the same treatment. That rejection is the turning of a blind eye and the agreement to say and do things that betray your deepest values and make you a cheat at your own game. And there is no doubt that the road to hell, personally and socially, is paved not so much with good intentions as with the adoption of attitudes and undertaking of actions that escapably disturb your conscience. The call to arms in this rule, it's so important. It's after rule 4. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated, which is after rule 3. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Is that when the good people don't speak up, the bad people take positions of valor and further corrupt the system. And in time, good institutions, instead of reinvigorating and becoming great, like we talked about, again, and something even better than before, as a consequence of the chaos, as a consequence of the failings, as a consequence of the disorder, as a consequence of the just life's everlasting change, the good companies become bad companies, which corrupt all parties, and ultimately, if we're going to talk in a business sense, ruin what was once potentially great for customers. But this is really about the individual and agency and you and me and everybody that's part of our economic system. Like pathology soaks itself into all organizations, every business. At any given time, it can happen because the world is scary. There are unknown unknowns, and all we can do is navigate as truthfully as possible through these unknown unknowns with others, with those that we like, know, and trust. And so this is rule 5. Do not do what you hate. Here's my final quote. I believe that the good that people do, small though it may appear, has more to do with the good that manifests broadly in the world than people think. And I believe the same about evil. We are each more responsible for the state of the world than we believe or would feel comfortable believing. Without careful attention, culture itself tilts toward, without careful attention, culture itself tilts toward corruption. Tyranny grows slowly and asks us to retreat in comparatively tiny steps. But each retreat increases the possibility of the next retreat. Each betrayal of conscience, each act of silence, despite the resentment we feel when silenced, and each rationalization weakens resistance and increases the probability of the next restrictive move forward. Please share this with a friend that um, you think would like beyond order and these uh, meanderings. And we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.